And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are the cards I'm going to be putting in my 3-color decks. So this is going to be a completion of my series on staples. Basically, I started out talking about the monocolor decks. What cards am I just auto-including in all my mono green decks, mono white decks, etc. No matter what the strategy is, right? You're always going to need removal, card draw, all that kind of good stuff. Then I moved on to the 2-color combinations. Then I moved on to the 3-color combinations. And one of the things I talked about in the beginnings of that series is what are the advantages of playing this color or color combination, and what are the drawbacks of playing that color combination. And of course, once we get to the 3-color combinations, that's less of an issue. Because you have access to 3 colors, you're not going to have any issue with card draw, of course, because you're going to have at least 1 color, maybe more. That's going to be pretty good at card draw. Same goes for removal. Same goes with protecting your stuff. Pretty much anything you want to do in a commander game, you're going to be able to do in any given 3-color combination. So there really isn't a whole lot of point in talking about the drawbacks or the advantages of those certain color combinations. It was more about just what cards are you going to play in that 3-color combination. I will say though, Grixis, the color combination I'm going to start out with, to me is the one 3-color combination that has a teensy bit of a drawback. And the reason why is because that is the only 3-color combination that doesn't include white or green. And of course, white and green are the only colors in the game of Magic that can remove enchantments with regularity. That to me is the one real drawback for the Grixis color combination, right? It's the only color combination where you don't have white and green. Of course, in any other 3-color combination, you're going to have either white or green or both. So dealing with enchantments isn't going to be an issue. In the Grixis color combination, you are going to have that issue. So do make sure to put that Feed the Swarm in there. Of course, red has Chaos Warp, Wild Magic Surge, right? That would sort of be the only addendum. As far as what this color combination has as a drawback, what it can't really deal with, Grixis has issues dealing with enchantments, so make sure you have answers with that. I suppose you also could deal with enchantments temporarily, at least, with my first 2 Grixis inclusions, Grixis Charm and Croesus's Charm. Both of these can bounce permanents, so that is a temporary way to get an enchantment off the battlefield, I suppose. Both of these are pretty good removal options. Croesus's Charm can again bounce a permanent, also destroy a non-black creature or destroy an artifact. Grixis Charm can bounce that permanent, also give a creature -4/-4, and also give your team +2/+0 until end of turn. So pretty great modal removal options for any Grixis deck. I wonder how many people auto-include Cruel Ultimatum into their Grixis decks. It seems pretty good. It used to be one that you would just put in every Grixis deck. I'm not sure if it still is. It is a pricey spell to cast, right? Blue, blue, black, 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 red, red. So 7 mana, all colored. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, and loses 5 life. You return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw 3 cards, and gain 5 life. I think that's pretty worth it for 7 mana. Obviously, you're going to pick the guy you really want to hurt with this. Maybe you're going to pick the guy who's playing the Voltron commander, force him to sacrifice it. Maybe you're going to pick the guy who's got a really full hand. You can make him discard some cards. Or maybe you just pick the guy who has been annoying you all game, and then you get to return something to your hand, draw 3 cards, and gain 5 life. I think you certainly could throw this in any Grixis deck and it'll be great for you. One of my favorite board wipes from last year, Hostile Takeover, for me would be an auto-include if I had a Grixis deck. Of course, I don't. I will also point out I don't have any color combinations of any of these decks currently. These are just the cards that I would be putting in if I made those decks, and Hostile Takeover for me is a really neat board wipe that I would include in a Grixis deck, despite the fact that Grixis does have access to great board wipes. Up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness 1/1 until end of turn. Up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness 4/4 until end of turn. Then Hostile Takeover deals 3 damage to each creature. I say all the time on my channel, I like the board wipes that are going to advantage me. If I just cast a Damnation that's going to kill all creatures, that's good. Certainly, all board wipes are usually great card advantage, but I'm not really getting an advantage off of that. I pick the creature on the board that is controlled by my opponents that has a bigger than 3 toughness, and I make that a 1/1 so I can get rid of it, and then I pick my my creature that is going to die to the board wipe, and I make it a 4/4. So I get a really nice advantage off of this. I think it's a really neat board wipe. Maestro's Ascendancy, also a card that could probably fit in a whole lot of Grixis decks. Blue, black, and a red enchantment. Once during each of your turns, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard by sacrificing a creature, in addition to paying its other costs. If a spell cast this way would put in your graveyard, exile it instead. I really think you could put this in any Grixis deck, regardless of the strategy you're doing. Certainly it can fit in particular strategies well, but you're always going to have instants and sorceries in your graveyard in a Grixis deck, no question, or in any deck for that matter, and you're always going to have creatures in play. And I just think it is likely that there's going to be that moment where, again, you maybe have that Feed the Swarm in your graveyard, and you really need to get rid of your opponent's Smothering Tithe, and that's your only option. Now I can just sacrifice a creature, doesn't matter what, maybe even my commander, if it's worth it for me to cast that Feed the Swarm from my graveyard if I really need to, right? You don't have to do this every turn, but it is a really nice option for you if you get in a bind like that. Moving on to Mardu, which of course is red, white, and black, and of course a Mardu staple in the Commander format since forever. I think the number one Mardu staple was Crackling Doom. That's the card that everyone put in their Mardu decks, and I think probably still could. I would say this is very early on with the cards that fit the Commander format really, really well without actually being printed that way, right? This card was not intended to be played in the Commander format. It just so happened that it fit really well, so it started getting played in the Commander format a whole lot. Red, white, and a black instant. Crackling Doom deals 2 damage to each opponent. Each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. So a really fantastic removal option that was hitting each opponent, right? You didn't get a lot of cards back in the day that were worded that way, that worked extra good in multiplayer formats, and of course this was one of them, and that's why this card has been a Commander staple for a long time. I don't see it much anymore. I think it's still pretty darn good. The 2 damage, of course, isn't much, but forcing all your opponents to sacrifice their best creature is pretty darn good at instant speed. Again with the ultimatums, and this one I think is for sure the most auto-include in any Mardu deck, and probably in even some 4 and 5 color decks as well, because it's so ridiculous. Red, red, white, 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 black, black, sorcery, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control, and everyone hates Cyclonic Rift. They complain about it all the time, and I say all the time, it's just bouncing your stuff to your hand, and then you just replay it on your next turn. That's not so bad. With Ruinous Ultimatum, that's not the case. You're actually getting your stuff destroyed, and unless you're in a deck where you want your stuff to go to the graveyard, you're pretty much screwed, right? Despite being 7 mana and 3 colors, this is still in 60,000 decks on EDH Rec. That's a lot. And of course, the reason why I think is fairly obvious. Moving on to one of my personal favorites, Brutal Horde Chief, which is one you wouldn't normally think of as a Mardu card, but of course in the Commander format, that is the color identity of this card. 3 and a black, Orc Warrior, 3/3. Whenever a creature you control attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, and has the ability 3 and 2 Boros hybrid mana, so that's where the Mardu part comes in. Creatures your opponents control block this turn if able, and you choose how those creatures block. So that first ability is just fantastic. I guess this would fit extra good in a life gain theme if you're doing life gain in Mardu, which is a possibility. Just draining your opponents every time you attack is great. A lot of strategies are going to be doing stuff like that. And that last ability is also pretty neat. Creatures your opponents control block, and you get to choose how they block. Can be used as a removal option. Pretty neat card, I think, in any Mardu deck. A couple of hidden gems, though, I think. Hide and Seek is a card that, for me, again, if I was putting a Mardu deck together, I probably would find room for it. So the Hide side, red and a white instant, put target artifact or enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. That's a pretty darn good removal option, right? You are tucking that artifact or enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. So if we got an indestructible artifact or enchantment, and there certainly are a lot of those in the format, this does deal with that. Certainly, you're never, ever going to not have a situation where you want to use that. The Seek side is not bad either. Black and a white instant, search target opponent's library for a card and exile it. You gain life equal to the mana value of that card, and then they shuffle. Worst case scenario here is I search my opponent's library for their most expensive card at instant speed for only 2 mana. I exile it, and again, it's probably a pretty good card like a Blightsteel Colossus or an Expropriate or something really powerful, and and then I gain a bunch of life on top of it. That seems pretty good, right? You can seek out their win con. You can seek out some just annoying card that you don't want to have to deal with later in the game. Both of the sides of this split card are really, really handy, and I think this card should get played more in the format. My last Mardu suggestion, Offspring's Revenge. 2 red, white, and a black enchantment at the beginning of combat on your turn. Exile target red, white, or black creature from your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 1/1 and it gains haste until your next turn. Again, this is a card that might seem a little specific. You know, it's one of those cards that you look at and you're like, okay, that's a pretty neat ability, but where does it specifically fit? I don't know if it specifically fits anywhere. I think it can go in any deck. Think about it. On combat, on all your turns, you just get to grab any creature that has died previously in the game and make a token copy of it. If it has an ETB, you get the ETB. If it has an attack trigger, you get an attack trigger. And guess what? If you're in that Ishin deck, which of course is going to have a whole lot of creatures with attack triggers, this is going to get you that, right? This seems like a slam dunk in an Ishin deck to me. I get that creature. Yeah, it's just a 1/1, but it likely has an attack trigger and it has haste, so I can use it right away. And of course, Ishin's going to double it up. I think this is a pretty phenomenal fit there. Also, I think it's a pretty good fit in a Alicia deck because Alicia is that Mardu sort of recursion strategy. And again, the power toughness doesn't really matter that much with Alicia, of course. I just want the ability that that creature is giving me, right? I'm really surprised this doesn't see more play. I think it's a pretty good card in a lot of decks. Moving on to Naya, and I'm going to start out again with a charm. Naya charm, red, green, and a white instant, and of course has 3 options. Deal 3 damage to target creature, return target card from a graveyard to owner's hand, or tap all creatures target player controls. So 3 very usable abilities in a commander game, and of course that's why this has been a commander staple for so long. If I'm making a Naya deck, I'm certainly going to find room for this. It's creature removal, it's graveyard hate. I guess it's also a regrowth effect, right? That's why that one ability is so fantastic, because you can use it as graveyard hate and you can also use it as a regrowth effect. Phenomenal card, of course, in the commander format. Another underrated split card, in my opinion, in the commander format, pure and simple. And if I'm making a Naya deck, I'm probably going to try to find room for this. The pure side, 1 red and a green, destroy target multicolored permanent. I mean, that's pretty good, right? For 3 mana, you're destroying a multicolored permanent, which in any commander game, I guess unless all your opponents are playing monocolored decks, you shouldn't have an issue finding a great target for that. At the very least, it's likely going to be your opponent's commander, right? The simple side, also pretty fantastic. 1 green and a white sorcery, destroy all auras and equipment. So if I'm in a Naya deck that isn't doing that, that seems pretty fantastic. It's going to really hose the auras and the equipment decks, but obviously almost every deck is going to play equipments. We all know Lightning Greaves is one of the most popular cards in the entire format, so there's never going to be a situation where you don't want to use that, but even if there is, you're still going to want to use the pure side as well. I think this is a great card in Commander. Cabaret Ascendancy is a card that you could easily include in any Naya deck, I think. Red, green, and a white enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. Look at the top card of your library. If it is a creature or planeswalker card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put that card in your hand, you may put it on the bottom of your library. I think that's pretty darn good, especially in any deck where you have a creature-heavy theme, or maybe one of those decks where you are sort of playing off the top of your library in Naya colors, which of course there is a bunch of those as well. It really smooths out your draws, right? I mean, if it's a creature or planeswalker, you're just going to put it into your hand, so you're getting an extra card draw. If it's something you don't really want, you can tuck it on the bottom of your library. I mean, if it's not a creature or planeswalker and it's something you actually want, you just draw it like you normally would, not really a downside. If I'm on turn 7 and it's a land, I don't really want a land, I got enough already, I'll tuck it on the bottom of my library and I get to draw something a little more impactful, right? I love cards like that in a commander game. Next up, another long-time commander staple that a lot of people probably have forgotten about, Fiery Justice, red, green, and a white sorcery. Fiery Justice deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. Target opponent gains 5 life. And of course, the reason why this became a commander staple again is because it's a very old card that just happened to fit really well in the multiplayer format. Because of course, in a 2-player format, you only got one option to be giving that 5 life away, so it's not super great, but 3 mana to deal 5 damage among any number of creatures is pretty great. You can end up taking 5 creatures off the board with this, or at least 2 or 3, and of course, you can play the politics angle here. Give the 5 life to the guy who's maybe not doing so well, or maybe you're trying to make friends with. That's why cards like this always fit so great in Commander, because they fit so well in that multiplayer format. In a lesser known suggestion, I'm going to throw out Knotvine Mystic. Red, green, and a white elf druid 2/2. Pay 1 and tap. Add Naya to your mana pool. So you're going to add green green, white, and a red to your mana pool. That seems pretty good in a Naya deck, right? If I'm in a Naya deck, not only is this a fantastic filter where I'm turning any color of mana into the colors that I'm going to need, but also it's adding 2 mana, right? So I'm putting 1 into this and getting 3 out. So this is essentially a tap for 2 mana. A 3 mana dork that taps for 2 mana is fantastic. But on top of that, it's giving me exactly the mana I need. This is, in my opinion, probably the best mana dork in a Naya deck. I'm surprised it doesn't see more play. If I'm making a Naya deck, I'm probably going to try to find room for it. Getting to Jeskai. And funny enough, Jeskai is the one that I had the most trouble with. You know, I just looked up all the cards in those colors and decided to pick out the ones that I thought were great includes. And Jeskai really is zoned in on a very specific archetype. As you can probably guess, it is the non-creature archetype. It really is tough to find Jeskai cards that aren't in that theme. At least not any that you want to be putting in your commander decks. And of course, a lot of Jeskai commanders are doing that. So that's not a huge drawback, of course, because if you are in that theme, it's very easy to include them, right? Jeskai Ascendancy, Whirlwind of Thought, 2 perfect examples. And again, you could probably throw these in any Jeskai deck, regardless of what you're doing, because they're both going to be fantastic whenever you're casting non-creature spells. Of course, Jeskai Ascendancy, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, your team gets +1/+1 and you untap your creatures. Pretty great. Also, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to loot. So 2 very handy abilities whenever you're casting a non-creature spell. And of course, Whirlwind of Thought, maybe even better. Every time you cast a non-creature spell, you get to draw a card. So in any deck, they can be good because, of course, you're going to be playing non-creature spells regardless of what your strategy is. Your instants, your sorceries, your enchantments, your artifacts. Of course, you're going to have a lot of all of those. And if you happen to be in the Spellslinger theme, you're going to have even more, so they're going to get even better. I think I probably would put both of these in a Jeskai deck if I was putting it together. I don't know. It's tough to say if it was for sure. Again, even if you're not building specifically around the non-creature strategy, they are both pretty good includes. My other suggestion for Jeskai, because there really isn't a bunch, are actual commanders. For example, both Narsets I think are pretty good includes in any Jeskai theme. Of course, we all know Narset Enlightened Master, really powerful card and just great value in my opinion. This doesn't have to be your commander to be great in a commander game. Whenever it attacks, it's going to exile the top 4 cards of your library and you get to cast all the non-creature spells for free. See, again, we're in the non-creature theme here, right? Narset Enlightened Exile, same thing. Creatures you control have prowess? That seems pretty good. Again, the non-creature theme, it's hard to get away from it in Jeskai colors. Whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from your graveyard and copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So it's just essentially a repeatable Snapcaster Mage, right? Great effect to have in any commander game. Also Elsha of the Infinite. Again, of course, we're in the non-creature theme, but a card that you could put in the 99 of any commander deck, and I think it'll be pretty good. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. That's pretty good in any commander deck. You may cast the top card of your library if it's a non-creature, non-land card, and you may cast it as though it had flash. In any Jeskai commander deck, that is very handy to do. I have a mana rock, I have an instant, I have a sorcery, I have a whatever, I can now cast it from the top of my library, right? So just take that into consideration. And I suppose in any of these other color combinations as well, but particularly in Jeskai, a lot of these commanders will fit into the decks of other commanders. There's a lot of great Jeskai commanders that could probably fit in the 99 of your decks. Moving on to the Bant color combination, which of course is green, white, and blue. And I think this might be my favorite. If I had to pick up 3 color combination, that's my favorite. It would be this one. And we are going to again start out with a charm, Bant charm, green, white, and a blue instant. Choose one, destroy target artifact, put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or counter target instant spells. All of those modes you're going to want to be using. Tuck your opponent's nasty creature on the bottom of their library. Destroy an artifact is always good. Counter an instant spell can be fantastic, whether I'm countering my opponent's Cyclonic Rift, or maybe I'm just countering that Swords to Plowshares that is targeting my commander, right? This can be seen as sort of a protection option as well. Anytime I'm throwing a Bant deck together, I am putting Bant Charm in there. I am also going to be for sure putting Endless Detour. I just love this card. Green, white, and a blue instant. The owner of target spell, non-land permanent, or card in a graveyard puts it on the top or bottom of their library. Very weird wording there. I I love this card because it is so versatile. It doesn't seem like much, I guess, but for me, because it's doing so much, that's why I like it. This can target spells, it can target permanents, or it can target cards in graveyards. So I can use this as a memory lapse type of effect where my opponent casts that expropriate, I can make them put it on top of their library and then cast it again, or my opponent's about to end the game with some permanent, I can make them put that on top of their library, or they're about to reanimate some big nasty thing out of their graveyard, and I can target that as well. I just love the options here. Next up, Soul of Emancipation, 4 green, white, and a blue, so a expensive 7 mana card. However, I think it is worth it. It's a 5/7 avatar. When Soul of Emancipation enters the battlefield, destroy up to 3 other target non-land permanents. For each of those permanents, its controller creates a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying. Pretty darn good. You're picking 3 permanents, you giving your opponent a 3/3 angel with flying, or I suppose you could be giving yourself 3/3 angels with flying. That is another way to use this card, but likely you're going to be using this on your opponent's stuff, and just being able to pick off the 3 best non-land permanents on the board is pretty darn good. And of course, because it's an ETB, we can get some shenanigans there as well. Like I say all the time, any ability stapled on a creature is ready to be abused in a number of different ways, so I would probably include this if I was putting a Bant deck together. Another really underrated split card in the Commander format is Supply and Demand. The supply side, X green and a white, sorcery, create X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens. So not super great, it's certainly usable in any given situation. Suppose if you're in a Bant token creation deck, it could be good. I don't know if anyone's doing that. Early in the game, I can throw out a couple blockers. Late in the game, I can create a giant army. It's always going to be usable, without a doubt. However, the best side here, I think, is the demand side. 1 white and a blue sorcery. Search your library for a multicolored card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this is a tutor. It is a Bant tutor that is going to get any card as long as it's multicolored, which I think in a Bant deck, you're probably going to have a lot of options. All the cards I've already talked about, right? We can definitely get some removal options here with that multicolored stipulation. Probably get a lot of other great stuff as well. Very underrated tutor option in the Commander format, I think. And lastly, in Bant, I'm going to talk about Wargate. And if I'm putting a Bant deck together, again, for me, Bant Charm is an auto-include and Wargate is also an auto-include regardless of what I'm doing. Again, another really underrated tutor option in the format. X green, white, and a blue sorcery. Search your library for a permanent card. With mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So this is a tutor that is getting a permanent and putting it directly on the battlefield. And I know a lot of people will look at this and say, okay, well, if I'm getting a creature with this, there's lots of better options. Sure, that can be the case, but if I'm in a Bant enchantment tribal deck, this goes and gets enchantments out of my library, puts them directly into play, right? That seems pretty good. This gets any permanent. I like that a lot. It can get pretty pricey if you're going to get some expensive stuff, but if you have a permanent in your library, an artifact, enchantment, creature, maybe even a planeswalker that is relatively inexpensive, this is a pretty great way to get it. But particularly why I would probably auto-include this in any commander deck is because it can get lands. And of course, lands cost 0 mana. So for 3 mana, I go get any land out of my library and put it directly into play. That seems pretty good. That's not bad, right? I can get my best land, my Gaia's Cradle maybe, put it directly into play for 3 mana. I like that a lot. Next up, we got Soultie. Again, another combination that I would say is probably one of my favorites as far as 3 colors goes, and one of the most popular, of course, in the Commander format. And once again, I'm starting out with a charm. One of the best, I think, in the format, Soultie charm. Black, blue, and a green instant. Choose one. Destroy target monocolored creature, destroy target artifact or enchantment, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. All fantastic modes. You're never going to play a Commander game where someone doesn't have a monocolored creature you probably want to get off the battlefield. You're certainly never going to play a Commander game where you don't want to destroy an artifact or enchantment. So those 2 modes alone, it's going to be tough to figure out which one you want to use. And then also draw 2 cards and discard a card, not bad either, especially if you're in a graveyard theme, which a lot of Soultie decks are. This is a great way to throw something in the graveyard if you want to, right? Another great way to throw stuff into your graveyard is with Soultie Ascendancy. This, to me, is a little bit of an underrated option in Soultie decks. I don't see it that much. I think it's pretty darn good. Black, green, and a blue enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. Look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put any number of them into your graveyard. Put the rest back on top of your library in any order. Also known as Surveil 2, right? That's essentially what this card is doing. And I, again, really like that. I like smoothing out my draws, setting up the top of my library, right? This card is doing all of that, and it is also putting cards in my graveyard that I want there. I don't love self-mill, as I've stated many, many times before, because I might be chucking stuff in my graveyard that I don't want there, right? I don't want that demonic tutor in my graveyard because I want to be able to cast it from my hand. So I really want to be able to draw it. And this card will make sure that it's not going into my graveyard, right? I look at the top 2 cards in my library. Oh, there's one card that I really want in my graveyard. The other card I want to put in my hand. I really like it for that reason. Even if you're not doing the graveyard strategy at all, just a really great way to smooth out your draws. Another card that I've talked about on my channel before because I just thought it was going to be a slam dunk in every Soultie deck, and I never see it, is Titan's Nest. 1 black, green, and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. So again, doing a very similar thing, and for that reason, fits in all those graveyard decks very easily. More importantly though, exile a card from your graveyard. Add a colorless. Spend this mana only to cast a colored spell with X in its mana cost. So exiling cards from your graveyard to give yourself free mana seems pretty good, right? Again, maybe in that graveyard deck it's extra good, or maybe not. I don't know. I guess if you're in a graveyard deck, you don't really want to be exiling stuff from your graveyard, but having the option to do so can be good. If we just ignore that last ability, again, the first ability is just putting stuff in our graveyard if we want it there, right? So if I'm in a graveyard deck, this is a great way to put stuff into my graveyard or not. And then later in the game, I just exile the stuff I don't want, right? Even if there's just one card in my graveyard that I don't really want, I can exile that to help recast my commander again. I'm shocked that this is not in more decks. I wouldn't say it's an auto include for me if I'm putting a Soultie deck together, but it seems like it can fit pretty easily in just about any of them. Another card that can fit pretty easily in any Soultie commander deck, I think, is Muldrotha the Gravetide. Again, talking about a commander, there's a bunch of commanders out there that probably fit in Soultie decks, but this one in particular can go in any commander deck. Doesn't matter the strategy you're doing, right? During each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. There is not a commander deck in any color combination that has ever been created that doesn't want to be doing that at some point. Even if you're not building around it, you're not planning on putting anything in your graveyard, you don't have any fetch lands that you can replay from your graveyard, none of that. At some point, your opponent is going to destroy your stuff and it's going to go to the graveyard. Maybe they're going to make you discard stuff. Whatever the case may be, there's always going to be plenty of situations where you can be playing stuff from your graveyard. Muldrotha the Gravetide is a phenomenal include, in my opinion, in any Soultie deck, regardless of what you are doing, unless by some chance you plan on not having a graveyard, I guess. Later in a game, I'm on like turn 8 or 10, I can slap my Muldrotha down and just start playing lands from my graveyard, start recasting creatures from my graveyard. Again, we've all seen a Muldrotha deck in action. All of that stuff can happen if Muldrotha is in the 990 your deck as well. I think it's a great include in a Soultie deck. And again, another underrated card in the format that I think could really go in just about any Soultie deck. I love this card a lot. Torrent Elemental, 4 and a blue elemental 3/5 with flying. Whenever Torrent Elemental attacks, tap all creatures defending player controls, and you can pay 3 and 2 hybrid Golgari mana, put Torrent Elemental from exile onto the battlefield tapped, activate only as a sorcery. So I'm going to make a case for this card. First of all, I love that first ability of whenever it attacks, tap all creatures defending player controls. That ability essentially means all my creatures are unblockable. Not only that, but it can get even worse for that guy, right? Let's pretend the guy I'm attacking is the guy who's to the right of me, which means he had his turn, now I have my turn. I attack him, tap down all his creatures, I get in for a bunch of damage, and then guess what? His creatures are still tapped, and the next 2 opponents in turn order also get in for damage as well, right? You can really smoke a guy with this card in situations like that. Also, that last ability is pretty neat. Funny enough, works really good with the Titan's Nest, because of course, if my Torrent Elemental dies, I can exile it from my graveyard with that Titan's Nest, and then put it back onto the battlefield with that ability from exile. I think this is a slam dunk in a Tassiger deck, because again, Tassiger has that Delve ability, very similar to the Titan's Nest, which can then exile my Torrent Elemental from the graveyard, and I can put it back into play again, right? It's just free value. Really, really great value in my opinion. And later in a game, tapping down all your opponent's creatures to get in for damage can be really, really important. I love this card a lot. If I was making a Soultie deck, I'd try to find room for it for sure. All right, and lastly, I'm talking about Abzan, and I know a lot of people will say, hey, well, there's some 3-color combinations missing here. I already covered them, right? I covered some of the 3-color combinations in my Staples series already, so if you're interested in what I'm putting in those decks, you can go check out my whole Staples series that I've already done. The only one I have not covered covered yet is Abzan. And again, I am starting out with a charm, Abzan charm, white, black, and a green instant. Choose one. Exile target creature with power 3 or greater, draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life, or distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures. So again, 3 fantastic modes. I talked about this at length in my charm video once again, so I'm not going to harp on it. 3 great abilities that can be used very easily in any commander game. I'm going to put this in my Abzan decks for sure. Another split card that I think is super underrated in the commander format. Crime and Punishment has a Orzhov half and a Golgari half, which of course in the commander format makes it an Abzan color identity. And I think it's a fantastic include if you're putting an Abzan deck together. The crime side, 3 white and a black sorcery. Put target creature or enchantment card in an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield into your control. That's a pretty neat card to have in a commander game, right? Later in a game, my opponent has a Vorinclex in their graveyard. I'll steal that. Maybe they got a Rhystic Study in their graveyard. I'll steal that because I got to draw some cards, right? Obviously, the options there are going to be phenomenal in any commander game. The punishment side, I also really like. X, black, and a green sorcery. Destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value X. So a pretty decent removal option. Now, of course, the very important wording here is you're destroying mana value X exactly. This is very similar to Blast Zone, which a lot of people, of course, are familiar with in the commander format. You're putting certain amount of counters on it, and your Blast Zone is going to hit everything of that exact mana value. Punishment is doing the same. It's going to hit all the artifacts, creatures, and enchantments with exactly mana value X. And unlike Blast Zone, this is going to hit all the token creatures, right? Blast Zone starts out with a counter on it, which makes it very difficult to get all the tokens off the battlefield because, of course, they're all mana value 0. With Punishment, you can do that. You can pay just a black and a green here and destroy each artifact, creature, enchantment with mana value 0, which means you're going to get all those treasure tokens. You're going to get all those zombie tokens, sapling tokens. It's a phenomenal token sweeper, and I really think this card needs to see more play. Another split card in Abzan colors that I think could go in any Abzan deck is Ready and Willing, and this is the Fuse option where you can actually cast both halves if you really want to, and certainly you could, or you could cast either side. So Ready, creatures you control are indestructible until end of turn, and you untap them. That seems pretty good in any commander game, right? It is just board wipe protection, and of course, at instant speed. Willing, 1 white and a black instant, creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Also, pretty fantastic in any commander game, and of course, because I can fuse it, I can use both, so I can swing with my whole team. Maybe my opponent decides to block, thinking they're going to kill some of my creatures. Instead, I'm going to make all my creatures indestructible and Death Touch and Lifelink. This is a blowout. I know 6 mana sounds like a lot, but this is a fantastic combat trick in a commander game and can be a serious blowout where I'm going to get a whole bunch of my opponent's creatures off the battlefield because, of course, all my creatures now have Death Touch. I'm not going to lose any of my creatures because they're all indestructible. I'm also going to gain a bunch of life, and I'm also going to untap my team so they can still block on my other opponent's turns. I think this is a great card. I'm really shocked it doesn't see more play. Again, with the ultimatum, Eerie Ultimatum, I think the 3 ultimatums that I mentioned in this video to me are probably the auto includes when it comes to ultimatums in the format. Of course, there's one for each 3 color combination. Cruel Ultimatum, Ruinous Ultimatum, and Eerie Ultimatum for me are the ones that if I'm making those 3 color combination decks, I'm going to for sure find room for these cards. White, white, black, 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 green, green. So again, 7 mana sorcery, return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. And of course, this card I think was essentially made for the commander format because of course, all your permanents in your graveyard are going to have different names. This is a singleton format after all. So for 7 mana, I'm returning all my permanents from my graveyard directly to the battlefield. This seems pretty good. I don't think I need to explain why this card could go in any commander deck. And I'm going to end off this video with, of course, a longtime commander staple, Dune Blast. 4 white, black, and a green sorcery. Choose up to 1 target creature and destroy the rest. And again, I don't think this requires any explanation in the commander format why it's good. Of course, you can choose your commander. I suppose you could choose any other creature that maybe you want on the battlefield. Obviously, it's an expensive board wipe. 7 mana is a lot, but as I say all the time, I want the board wipe that's going to advantage me. And of course, this is the most obvious way to advantage you. I get to keep the creature I want and all the rest get destroyed. So a great include in any Abzan commander deck. That is it. That is all though. All the 3 color combinations I have now covered. I'm not going to cover any 4 or 5 color combinations. I think it gets kind of silly at that point where there's so many options, right? That's what I talk about when I'm talking about how building a 5-color deck can be so difficult because you have every card available to you. And what are you going to put in there? Who knows? I guess it depends on your personal choices or what you're doing. With the 3-color combinations though, and the 2-color and the monocolored, I've gone over all of them, the cards that I will be putting in those decks that I'm going to be trying to find room for regardless of what I'm doing in the strategy or the theme that I am playing. Check out that playlist. The link is in the description below. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of the cards I've mentioned on this list today, I do have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below as well. Feel free to give it a click. It helps support the channel. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.